This is a recording of a lockdown Zoom session about composition. I'm going to do a short presentation about composition, some of the ideas we'll think about when we're thinking about considering composition. And after that, there'll also be some practice where we will look at some of the ideas we've talked about in the presentation and think about a technique we're going to be using, ink and dry brush, washes, that sort of thing, amongst other things. So I'm just going to share my screen and put the presentation up. Go. So composition. Composition in a picture could be described as the arrangement of the formal elements of the picture. The formal elements of a composition are line, shape, value, form, color, texture, and pattern. Value means lightness and darkness, tone, grayscale, that sort of thing. The only thing, concept or the idea of or motivation behind the image may also influence a composition. So composition is really how we manipulate the surface. To put it shortly, some ideas. So some of the things that people think about when they're thinking about composition. There's one idea. There is the golden ratio, or the golden mean as it's sometimes called, which is illustrated top left there. That's a graphic. We should turn that back to front. That's why those numerals seem odd. It's just a back to front graphic. And it's the golden ratio is an old mathematical formula. It's about summed up by being about 1 to 1.6. So if the square, if the length of the square is considered to be 1 unit, the length of the rectangle, the bottom of the rectangle, is 1.6, and that's the ratio that creates that sort of spiral there. Each time you make a rectangle, you make a box of a square size and divide it up by 1.6. And you reach that ratio. It exists in nature. We find it in nature. It's not the only ratio in nature. See in that spiral. But also there in the Parthenon, you see that the ancient Greeks who designed the Parthenon made reference to the golden ratio. The ratio, the size of the pediment there is defined by the golden ratio and its relationship to the ground and to the peak of the building are all defined by the golden ratio. So it's an idea which has existed for a long time, still current. Lots of people refer to it. Leonardo da Vinci used it a lot. He referred to it as the divine proportion. His Vitruvian Man there on the left was designed around the golden ratio, and the Mona Lisa, reference to it, John the Baptist there also. So it's an idea that he made reference to a lot, and he found useful. And it's also a proportion that clearly we as humans respond to. There's something about it which sits well with us, that a set of relationships that we find pleasing, to put it simply. And composition is often about creating a set of relationships that work together, and that ratio seems to provide that. Perspective is a very powerful compositional tool. That illustration there of, I think it's Mantegna, it's not, can't remember what it is. It's a crucifixion using 1 point perspective. So all the parallel lines that exist in that arch, in that void that the crucifixion is taking place in, they converge on 1 point. So it's called 1 point perspective. And it's a very powerful tool, used mostly in sort of Western European art, but it does exist in other cultures as well, but mostly used by us in the West. But it's a very powerful tool for a composition. And that's Raphael's Holy Family, and it's just an illustration of how a simple geometric shape can form a very solid compositional structure. That's just a triangle, the Holy Family in the triangle form. So geometric shapes, that's a wedge. A wedge is often used as a strong element of a picture. We'll talk about that a wee bit later during the practice. The rule of thirds, which is often referred to in terms of photography nowadays, but it's been used commonly down through time also. The idea being, according to that image top right there, the photograph of the tree, that if you divide the surface up into thirds, the intersecting points, the 4 intersecting points, become the points of most interest, if you like, the best points to put the focus of your picture on. And that's kind of that's our Constable landscape on the left there, and Cézanne still life underneath. They've kind of used that idea. I happen to have chosen 3 images where the focal point is the bottom right-hand intersection. That's not the only place it should be, but that's, in this case, that's where it is. So the rule of thirds is also a good tool, but none of these tools are the only thing you need to think about. It's always, they're good ways to, they're ways that may offer you some sort of insight into what you're doing or what someone else has done, but not the only way of thinking about it. These are artists who have created a framework within the framework of the painting in order to draw attention to something, to what they want the focus of the idea of the picture to be. It's Constable Salisbury Cathedral on the left there, where it's off centre, but he's used trees to frame the focus of the painting. And the foreground, the trees are silhouetted, not exactly silhouetted, but they're darker, and you go through that to the light, to the lighter objects, which are the focus of the painting. Cézanne's Great Bathers on the right used kind of an archway of trees, not to focus in on what's on the background, but rather just to give context, framework to the bathers, the people who are sitting, and the focus of the picture, sitting in front of it and the focus of the picture. So there's 2 different ways of using trees as archways. We're going to be doing that in the practice that we will get around to eventually later on. And underneath that's Howard Hodgkin. Howard Hodgkin's an English abstract painter who very often would create a frame. So made these really lovely abstract paintings. And he would often, well, he would put a physical frame, wooden frame, round his work, and then he would paint over it, but he would paint over it to form another frame. So the object was one whole, the frame was a part of the image, but also he painted a coloured frame within which his abstract narrative drama, whatever you want to call it, would take place. So using a frame within the frame of the picture is also a compositional device. This is Nicolas Poussin, who's a French sort of classical romantic painter. That's a famous painting called Et in Arcadia Ego. I've put various different graphics illustrating the composition up, really just to show the idea that some people use very mathematical approach to how they build a composition, to how they build symmetries or equilibriums, whatever you want to call it. And Et in Arcadia Ego is he did a couple of versions of it. This is the second one. And there's all sorts of theories about how the maths of that keys into kind of mystical ideas to do with how the stars work, and the lengths of the staves have significance in that, with that sort of thing. But that's a mathematical approach to composition, which I have never done, and I don't really know anything about, and I'm not particularly drawn to it. But that's how some people have approached composition to build a picture. This graphic, it's Poussin again. The image on the left there is a Poussin landscape. The ones in the middle are Cézanne, and the one on the right is Braque. And the idea I'm trying to illustrate there is that the actual structure or the ideas of the motifs within the image are kind of put together in a similar way. Cézanne, whose work is in the middle, said he wanted to paint a Poussin after nature. So Poussin was very analytical in the way that he did things. To build compositions, particularly figure compositions, he would have this little light box that he'd build wax models in and put them in trees and whatever, and shine lights on them to see how the work was going to be put together. Well, Cézanne kind of didn't want to do that. He wanted to work from nature. He wanted to be on plein air, as they would say, and work from life. But Cézanne also had this idea that nature was, forms were built up. Forms basically were built up of the sphere, the cone, and the triangle. So that gave his work a very a great sense of volume. All the things that he did, a great sense of volume. And the Cubists, Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso, when they came to develop the idea of Cubism, they looked at Cézanne about how he built that how you'd use that idea of building form with the cube, the cone, and the sphere when they started to develop cubism. So there's three very different styles of painting, but they've been put together in a similar way. The tree uses the structural foreground and then midground and background. So the compositional idea is the same. It's the stylistic devices used, and how you manipulate those formal properties of the picture, as I said at the start. And that's a Cézanne still life, which is, I've tried to show some of the structural devices he's used to build it. It's sitting on, the still life sitting on a table, which is at an oblique angle, at a diagonal angle across the canvas, and he's used that to use the diagonal axes of the rectangle. So the front of the table forms that oblique angle, and the arrangement of the apples and the other things on the table form the angle of interest across the other way. But the other parts of that composition, really the contrast between the white piece of drapery and the darker, more patterned piece of drapery. In this instance, the split is about 50-50 between the white and the other drapery. And then the kind of careful placement of the apples on the white. So all those things are balanced. So creating a composition is very often about creating a balanced set of components, using the idea of the edges of the surface you're working on, and the angles sometimes within that, and the shapes, lightness and darkness, texture, all those things within the rectangle. And that's an illustration of that idea there. And there's another, it's a Japanese print by, I cannot remember who by, it might be Hokusai. And he's used a similar idea to Cézanne. He's using the diagonals of the image to create a strong structure on which to build his image. Just same structural lines, obviously very different subject matter, very different execution. That's two images. The top one's by Hokusai's Great Wave, with Mount Fuji in the background. The bottom one's a Monet seascape with an arch, sea arch. And what I'm trying to show there is how is the idea of balance, of creating a balanced whole. So the wave in Hokusai's wave is the space that we're interested in, and then the area of the sky round about it is the negative space, but they take up pretty much a similar amount of space within the picture, so they're very balanced. And the texture and the darkness, lightness and darkness of the wave at the front and the water is balanced against the much more muted, simple color of the background. Although there's a sort of faded bit from the bottom covering Mount Fuji. And the Monet one at the bottom is a similar idea. It's almost like two horseshoes, interlocking horseshoes, one of the rock and the other of the sea and the sky, making a sort of a balanced whole. And I put those up just because they're simple illustrations of that idea of creating a balance. That's a balance of shape I'm talking about, and then of tone and color and mark, all those things also. The balance creating a satisfying composition, which is commonly looked for. Those four ideas there I've talked about quite a lot in class, as a way of creating the illusion of depth. The top left, overlapping shapes, so the tree at the front overlaps the others. Top right, relative size, so the tree on the left is bigger than the trees on the right as they go away from you. So overlapping shapes, relative size. Bottom right, that's a Hodgkin drawing, that's Hodgkin drawing on the top left, Eric Revilliers top right. Hodgkin drawing bottom right, converging lines or perspective, very important if you want to create the illusion of depth. And then bottom left, Giorgio Morandi, still life, transition from light to dark. So those four ideas are very important for creating the illusion of depth, which might be, is very often important for people who want to build a composition. And that's Hockney's, the drawing on the left again, it's called The Gate. The drawing on the left, using that idea of overlapping shapes, but the painting on the right is very obviously closely related to it, but he's had to readjust the idea of the formal properties. So he's got color in the one on the right, and that changes how you, changes how you think about it. Where you need to work out how your ideas are going to change. The tree, for instance, which is white and very like a silhouette, and the drawing in the painting, it becomes a very warm sort of burnt sienna brown, and comes forward for that reason. Whereas in the drawing, the trees, the foliage behind is dark, and that's why it stands out against and sits in a separate space from the light silhouette of the tree. But in the painting, the green is actually of a lighter value than the tree, which is mostly. And that separates them out. But the foliage is also, it's two greens. It's a warmer green and a cool green, and that pushes it back from the tree also, apart from the fact that the branches of the tree are overlapping it. So what I'm trying to illustrate there is that between drawings and paintings, we very often have to readjust how we think about the relationships of the formal properties of when we're building a composition. Then sort of mid-20th century, thinking of all these ideas which are of building composition, along comes abstract expressionism. In this case, Jackson Pollock, and he creates what's called all over painting. So your marks and your texture and all those considerations cover the whole surface in an even covering, if you like, to put it that way. And that idea was fairly groundbreaking. It was, very important, and it is an important idea. But it kind of just becomes a part of the vocabulary of how to build a picture. Pollock himself did those paintings for a few years, then moved on, started to want to do other things before he died in the car crash. Never really got to anything else as well known as that series of paintings. So he worked here on he developed, if you like, a compositional device that just becomes part of the vocabulary of art. These pictures there are by a guy called Joseph Albers, who was a German who moved to America and taught there. He was from the Bauhaus, then he moved to America pre-Second World War, and he taught art. But his color and the relationships of color was his big thing. He wrote a very important book called The Interaction of Color, and did two big important bodies of work. One's called Adobe, which are those two images at the top, two examples of that body of work, and the squares at the bottom are from his series of work called Homage to the Square, which is sort of better known than the Adobe series. And that's each one of those sets of squares as an individual piece that he's created. I've just put them together to show you a variety of them. And his work was about the relationship of color. So he chose the square because the square was the most man-made shape he could think of, the most artificial, if you like, shape for building something in. And the idea I'm trying to illustrate is that although the compositions are all exactly the same, the size of the squares pretty much the same size, the colors obviously change, and that changes the composition. It changes how we respond to it. So that one formal property is exactly the same in all of them. Another formal property is different, and that's what creates the different composition, if you like, the different set of relationships. And the same goes for the Adobe series, but it's more the idea is more clearly illustrated, if you like, more clearly expressed in the Homage to the Square series. But they're beautiful work, they're lovely things. And just another example of using similar ideas but different. That's a Pierre Bonnar painting on the left and Richard Diemenkorn on the right. And they're both interiors, both looking out of windows or doors, using a lot of rectangles, a lot of diagonals to build the set of relationships. But Bonnar is using high key color, very, very bright paintings of interiors. It did a lot. And Richard Diemenkorn, obviously a lot of contrast, much more contrast. So once again, as with the Albers things, similar ways of building a picture, but very different uses of some of the formal properties in the way that they build their pictures. Similarities and differences. So there we are, the composition, just to repeat that quote from the start, it's about how we how we manipulate the formal properties of a picture on the surface that create the composition. And there are many different ways of doing that. So I'm just going to stop the thing that, and I'm going to go to my hands, and we're going to work on the practice. So should be able to see, that's my hands there. What we're going to do, first of all, I want to do during the practice, I want to work with this idea of dry brushing. Before we get to the actual compositional part, I want to work on a wee bit on technique and how we will use the technique. So I've got some ink there, and it's drawing ink, it's India ink, which is a wee bit thicker. It's also, once you put it on, it dries, it won't move if you put water over the top of it. And I will take a brush, if I do a brush, I can find it. What I want to do, I'm just going to do a quick example on this of the technique I want to use, dry brushing. So I'm going to take some ink on my brush and just do that. So you can see what's happening there. I'm making a mark, and the mark is breaking up. Okay, when you put it, first there's a sort of solid bit of color, but then as it dries out, the mark becomes much more broken, and it's called using a dry brushing. Hang on. I put that there, you can see better. So that mark there is broken up using dry brush, and that's the idea I want us to work with. It's going to be a part of both the drawings that we do today, the main pieces of work that we create. So using a dry brush, that's what I want to do. And this is the first, once again, as an exercise, I want to make a tree, draw a tree, using the dry brush idea. So, and this is one I've made up. It's not from any illustration or anything like that. What I want to do is put that there. And why I haven't done it, should have done it before I started. I often like to, when I'm doing these exercises, sort of put a frame around it. It helps me to focus on what I'm doing. And I'm going to work with this idea here. So it's a fairly kind of common tree shape, if you like. There's a couple of things to consider about it. So the main trunk of the tree is there, then the branches come out, and so I'm interested in the marks that are being made here, but these holes in between these branches, they're kind of important compositionally, if you like, if you're doing this sort of thing in a bigger picture, or they allow the tree to breathe. It would be very dense, kind of sort of leaves, if you like, on the tree. If you don't kind of break it up and leave some holes, and you can do that in other places too, but that's what I've done. So what I'm going to do first of all is just do a quick, and this is very much an exercise. It's not going to be done with any kind of, it's not for no other purpose than practicing using the dry brush idea. That's the point I'm trying to make. So that's enough for me to start. Just a very simple idea of where the tree is. I've put it on a hillside there. So I might just draw that in, work with that. But then, so I want to do what I did in that little thing, and that's start using a dry brush. Now, I'm not going to try to render each area I'm working on it in a finished way from the very start. I just sort of start working into it and see where it goes. So I'll certainly come back to that, but that's a sort of basic idea. Then start thinking about, and it's I'm trying to work as freely as I can to give myself a better understanding of what working with the dry brush is like. It's not, we work from photographs in the classes, and we'll be working from photographs in the exercises. And very often the temptation is to try to create a perfect facsimile of what the photograph looks like. And that's not what these exercises are about at all. It's about the technique, the ways of working that I'm interested in, really. And the sort of the motif, the photographic reference we're working from is literally just that. It's a reference to be used, not something necessarily to be copied. So, I'm more interested in the kind of mark I'm making. So those are all fairly loose, fairly big marks. Now this, So I want a wee bit more solid stuff, I think. Some edges. You can use the brush, that sort of dabby thing, and as you do it, it'll dry out, and you get some more broken up marks. You can, that's perfectly legitimate. People sometimes say to me in class, "Can I do this?" Thing, whatever it is they're thinking about. My answer is always the same. There are no rules, if you like. No, the art police aren't going to run through the door and say you can't do that. It's about taking the ideas that are that we start working with and playing with them, seeing how you can make them work. So I've got a couple of brushes there. I've got that. I've got one that's that sort of size. Okay, and I've got a very thin one. So I might go to that a wee bit and just do some sort of smaller marks to see how that works. Some other wee. Now I'm just going to dry that off with the hairdryer and okay, once I'm going to use some thinner washes a wee bit on it also. Yeah, again, quite often, quite. They're not particularly delicate. Try that off. Then maybe work into it again a wee bit more. So, you can use the dry brush both in that sort of a linear, blocky way, or you can use it in a more kind of textural way. That's and you can do more with it also. But that's what I'm going to show you just now. So that's kind of an exercise. Really, if you do that, it's not particularly about having a sort of perfect end result. It's more about thinking about what's happening with the paint, with the ink, how you manipulate the brush to create that sort of effect. And we're going to use that now in a couple of exercises, making a couple of pictures. So I'll put that to the side, and we'll move on. So I want to work with this image here. Now, this is a picture I took just along the studio from here on the West Island Way. We had snow a couple of weeks ago, and I took this image, and I showed you those pictures by Constable and Cézanne, and also I heard Hodgkin, Constable and Cézanne had the idea framed by trees, and that's what I've done here. These two big trees frame the idea of this is Dungan in the background with the snow on it. So you get this very open, clear distance you're seeing, and then the other sort of 2/3 of the idea of rule of thirds a bit here have this kind of entanglement of trees and branches and bring the focus onto what's going on here. There's other things happening as well. This part of the landscape is in shadow, so you get sort of darker stuff here, and there's all this scrubbiness of the grass coming through the snow. So the strong linear parts of the composition with the tree trunks and the branches, the more sort of scrubby idea of the shadow going on here. Then I spoke at wedges, how Raphael used that kind of triangle to build his Holy Family. There's all sorts of there's a wedge happening there. See that shape in the corner? That gives us that's a wee sort of, and this fence here, how those fence posts get smaller to kind of create a distance, and the wedge, well, it forms a compositional device looking up the corner. But you get this, so kind of goes that way, then it goes up that way, then comes across. There's a kind of a zigzag going on in the picture also with the wedge, and then this line, there's a line going up through the I think it's a drain there. So you get the kind of mid-value darkness of the foreground, which also leads us into the brighter focus of the background. So those are the kind of ideas we're working with, and we'll use the dry brushing idea that I just demonstrated there for the trees, but also for this kind of scrubby area in here as we work with that. So quite often a good thing to do when you're starting a picture is to think about whatever ideas are contained within it, or that you want to accentuate, or you're going to use to make your image. Just doing a little sketch of it. That's about 2.5 by 3.5 inches. Looking at some of those ideas I talked about. You know, the linear darkness of the trees. I haven't really shown the sort of entanglement of the branches, that sort of thing. The wedge there in the corner, and how that comes back up there, a zigzag going on. So yeah, doing a quick sketch before you start can be a good way to gain more understandings about what it is you're going to do. And that's my example there that I built of it. Just a drawing of the photograph using some of the ideas I've talked about. So I'm going to put that there for you to see, and then I'm going to draw and make an example. So what I'm going to use is this piece of paper here, and this piece of paper has a ground on it. And so I've built the ground with, but using graphite. So what I did was I took a pencil. Hang on. Took a pencil and I sharpened the pencil onto the bit of paper. It was a clean bit of paper, so there's a bit of paper like that, just with a rectangle on it. So you sharpen the pencil on. You get rid of the wood, and you're left with these wee bits of graphite on the bit of paper. And you take something. I've got a cotton pad, or you can use your fingers, whatever, and rub it in. You need a bit more than I've done to do the whole thing. And that gives you a ground. So there's a coating of graphite on the surface of the paper. And you can do that with all sorts of things, charcoal, whatever. And that's what I've done on this. That whole thing has a ground on it. And that means you can then, rub it out, which is what we're going to do. But before we do that, I want to think about the main sort of compositional elements of this, sort of divide it up a wee bit. I'm going to think about the two trees, the silhouette of the hill. So Duncan has quite a distinctive silhouette. We'll think about that. So mark in where they're going to be, then start working with the ink and the dry brushing. So that tree is about there. It doesn't go to the bottom. Stops about there, and the other tree is kind of over here and comes down. That doesn't go to the bottom either, because there's a wedge, that wedge of sort of snow that goes there. Yeah, and that other line kind of goes up like that sort of thing. So this tree, I'll hold it up to you in a second. Yeah. So that sort of thing. Okay, and now Duncan sort of sits in there in that space, and there's a kind of the landscape comes up, and there's a wee shoulder there, and the cone of the peak carries on, and these other trees going on, and then it goes up like that. So that's kind of what I'm going to do for the make it a bit bigger to make it easier to see. And now what I'm going to do is use a bit of reductive drawing. So the reason I put the ground on the paper is so I can get quite a nice contrast, because the brightest part is just the snow of Dungan and the hill and this bit of foreground. And I'm going to just rub out the ground to establish where that is. Now, I think it's really nice contrast. It carries on up there also. And down that way a wee bit. Okay, so that's quite a good way of building that part of the picture using the reductive idea. So we'll come in and we'll work more into this sort of where the hill is, and we'll think about the sky also a wee bit later on. I'll maybe do a bit of the sky now. So the sky, it has a transition from lighter to darker. as the sky does. So what I'm going to do is just gently, with the edge of the rubber, just lighten that up a wee bit, but not so much that it you can't see the edge of them going, right? And there also. What you'll find is that when you do this, generally, quite often your fingers will, because there's graphite over the whole thing, you'll pick up graphite on your hand. Although you might not be resting your hand on the drawing, it will touch it, and you'll kind of, these bits that you've made beautifully clean will get dirty. So you need to, from time to time, to come and clean them out. And the other thing I'm going to do is bring a bit of that up there, a bit darker. Maybe give that a rub also, whatever. Okay, so let's start. Now we want to start working on the trees with the dry brushing, and it's pretty much as I did it before. I'm going to start just now. In the photograph, the trees are very sort of like a silhouette, and that's just one of the sort of things that photography does. It tends to the light it's registering is the sort of the light of the background, so that creates too much of a difference for the camera, and it tends to go very dark when you get to the darker values. If you were standing in front of the trees, they wouldn't be so silhouetted, is the point I'm trying to make. So you'd see them a bit more of the texture of the surface, and but the dry brush, the ink rather, creates a really nice contrast. It gives you that sense of darker foreground, which gives you much more depth to your picture. You get the contrast, the transition from light to dark, which gives you much more depth in your picture. So even in abstract painting, that idea of transition from light to dark work, that Howard Hodgkin picture I showed you, if the lightness and darkness of all of those colors was the same, the painting would be very flat, because there's different values, different intensities of colors in that painting. The surface has more variety, more depth. So he's not trying to create the illusion of depth in his painting, but he's trying to create the sense of depth in the painting, of a variety of planes within the painting. So the darkness there really starts to make these areas jump out and be separate. So that'll do just now. I can come back to that, and then really just working on the other trees. And I think, as I said earlier on, don't worry about trying to create a perfect facsimile of anything. These, photographs, the things you work from are a reference to use your techniques, your ways of working to communicate your ideas, to help you communicate your ideas. It's not about creating, or in this instance, it's not about creating a perfect sort of rendition. If you're doing photorealistic painting, it might be. But in this instance, they just give you an excuse to put where the medium will go on the paper. So so these verticals, these very, very highly contrasted verticals, are quite important compositional tools. They occupy the thirds at the edge of the painting, the drawing, sorry. So although I'm not worrying about how perfect a copy of the photograph I'm making, I'm sort of going back to it for reference from time to time. So there's all that. Then in the you know, here there's this really nice device of the fence posts, which help to create a bit of perspective, a bit of sense of depth in the foreground, if you're after that sort of thing. You know, as they get smaller, as they go further away from you. Okay, and then this kind of, you got a nice tree that kind of runs there, fallen tree behind that. Another one down here. But all this, you know, bring that a little bit darker, give it a better edge, sharper edge. I quite like the way that all these lines of these verticals are broken up. Gives more of a sense of sort of shape of the play of light on the surface, and implies shape. So, and all this sort of scrubbiness in here is very kind of similar to what we were doing with the tree idea, just to break up the surface, bring a bit of interest. Just thing in here, this kind of ditch. So the high contrast of the sort of dry brush inky mark is, you know, creates a big different contrast to what's going on behind, and helps to build the depth of the picture. Oops. There's some other verticals going on here also. So you might dry that off. And right there. Maybe use some lighter, more diluted washes also. So the graphite you've put on the surface graphite's a very slippy thing, very shiny thing, but there shouldn't be too much in there that it won't take the wash, you know, and you can darken this sort of thing down. It just helps to give that sort of shadowy feel, the darkness of the silhouettiness. Yeah, okay, just now. So, what I want to do is work a wee bit on the landscape of it. So there's some trees that come down here. So I want to bring them out. I'm just going to do that with the brush. I could do that with the sorry, the pencil. Oh, too much. Never mind. I could. Yeah, I've come too far. No, just be careful you don't get ink on your hand. A wee bit. You could do that with a bit of a wash if you want to. Too much, all right? Way too much. And this bit of landscape here also. You could take your, if you wanted to, you can take your smaller brush, and there's all sorts of wee grassy things going on here. You might want to, you know, think about that sort of thing, like that. And the mark there is also kind of breaking up. It's solid in some bits. It's dry brush in others. So I'm not going to do too much more, I don't think. I might do a wee bit more to those trees. They think they need a wee bit more darkness to them. Better edge, probably. I think that's what it is. They need a better edge. There we go. So I'll probably leave it at that. Go. Yeah, so I'm going in the snow using a bit of dry brush, bit of graphite, and some washes, thinking about the idea of framing your focus by using these two big trees with this kind of entanglement of branches to do the outside bit to bring your focus in on the middle, and the darker foreground using a wedge to give that a bit of perspective, darker foreground leading into the lightness of the hill behind. So that's that sort of compositional idea and the use of dry brush. Okay, so I'm going to put that to the side. I'll do for that just now. So yeah, I am talking about doing sketches. So sometimes it's quite nice to take an idea. So this is also taken out the same day, and it's a field further along the way, and a farm shed byre. And I'm just looking at the composition, the compositional idea. The thing that I think caught my attention was just this shape here, the strong shape here, darkness, and this strong, darker shape here in the foreground. They kind of give you a diagonal that way. Then there's two other sort of compositional ideas. You get, there's this, it's not exactly a rectangle, but this bit at the bottom right, which has a diagonal going through it. Darker one side, lighter the other. And at the top you have something balancing against it, if you like, and that's this idea here, these three stripes. You've got sky, trees, and field, light, medium, and dark. Okay, that going on there. And so just to, if you were going to make a picture of that idea or interested in that idea, you might do a quick sketch of it on, yeah, like that sort of thing there. On, yet again, a small little rectangle of paper, just to look at that, those ideas, the strong contrast of these two shapes, of these two areas of your surface, and then the idea of this three areas here balanced against this rectangle here with the diagonal through it. So looking at the composition and how it might work, and doing a little sketch of it, little thumbnail sketches can be really handy things when we are working. Another one there. So the next idea I want to work with is one I just entirely made up. But yet again, it's working with trees and the dry brush idea. Hang on. So the paper. I'm not going to ground it this time, but it's just an idea I made up, if you like, of two trees, rather like the one we did earlier on, with a couple of sheep in between, and on a field and some trees beyond. But it's really about shapes. So you get these two strong shapes of the trees, and you get the negative shape of what's beyond them and underneath them. And when I was thinking about that, I did a quick sketch. Here it is there. And I'm once again thinking about the idea of using trees to frame whatever it is you want to be the focus. So I wanted these two sheep to be the focus, the mother and the lamb in the field there between the trees. And for the reference for the sheep, I used these Henry Moore drawings. Henry Moore, the sculptor, did a really lovely set of drawings of sheep in fields. You'll find them easily enough on the internet. And that's what these two, this is one of his drawings here. That's what these sheep are based on. There's another one in my example. I did another one in the background there. So the sheep are references from Henry Moore, and the trees themselves are kind of made up in my reference there. So I'm going to leave all of those things there. Move my bit of paper across. Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, you can see the edge. There you go. So the first thing I want to think about is the trees. Where are the trees going to be? And they're that sort of mushroom shape, if you like. Just simple rendering of where. I'll make it a bit darker so you can see it. That's that sort of idea there. Once again, thinking about the gaps between the branches that'll create some sort of a bit more. So it's not just too heavy a shape in the tree, and there's this sort of mushroomy tree type shape here. And you'll have the back of the field doing something like this, the angle perhaps, and the trees behind doing that sort of thing. But the sheep underneath, I'm going to draw the sheep in quickly. So that if you make your sheep very big, your trees, and they're on the same plane as the trees are going to be really small. And if you make the sheep really small, the trees are going to be really big. So you just need to make, that's a decision you need to make. I'll stick to the kind of scale that I've used thus far. Just to give myself a feeling for where they're going to be. And I'll come back and work into them later on in the process. So that's about right for them. And what I'm interested in here in the trees in the background is all these little negative shapes happening here. You get the main body of the trees here, some sort of forming a pattern of verticals, but you get all these little negative spaces, the tree trunks with the negative spaces in between. And we'll sort of think about that maybe later on, but it'll be this this sort of thing going on, kind of in between the trees. Okay, now, and then I'm going to work with the dry, same as I did before, just dry brush straight into it. So the whole, a big part of the practice here is really just to get a better feel for what the idea of the dry brush and ink will do. So it just creates a nice, it's actually pretty good for that tree, quite like that. Once again, start it off and don't worry about how complete it might be. That might be as much as I'm going to do to those trees. I'm not sure yet. Then, as before, you know, working with this idea of the holes between the branches to keep the something getting too heavy. So areas of density of marks. So your mark shouldn't be the same over the whole thing. There should be a variety in the kind of marks you're making. I guess that's why I was using the smaller brushes when I did the thing earlier on. But thinking about this kind of shape and negative shape that I talked about, these two strong, almost silhouettes, rather like the in that drawing we just finished with the darker foreground. That's certainly a part of what I'm thinking about when I'm doing this. Darker foreground. Constable in Salisbury Cathedral thing had that also. Just thinking about the corners as well. Corners are quite important in pictures. How we address them, think about them. Sort of texturey things. Yes, that's pretty good shape at the moment. Right, that'll do for that just now. I'll give that a quick dry. Okay, and now I'm going to do what I did before and use some washes. So I'm actually going to initially think about the background. I don't have a bigger brush, so it'll be with me handy at the moment. I'll just use this brush here to think about this. And I'm going to put a wash pretty much over the whole thing. Apart from the sheep, I'm going to leave the sheep just white. They're going to be a focus for the picture. So I'm going to leave that one, put a wash over, a simple wash over the whole thing, but leave the sheep white. So just sort of thing. A bit darker than I intended, but never mind. bit back to front, but hey ho. So there you go. Now, and I want to, when I said it's a bit back to front, what I want to do is to create this idea of the darker foreground, lighter kind of background, midground. So I'm going to just lift some of that off. It's not, I wasn't particularly, delicate the way I put that down. I don't mind the sort of texture of the brush marks. I'm happy with that. You may not always work that way. You might, there might be times when you're more careful about edges and brush marks, but in this type of drawing using ink, that I'm absolutely fine with that. And what I'll probably do is just bring some, darker bits of ink. This is diluted ink. This wash is made by diluting ink. Just make it a wee bit darker in the foreground there. Be shadow perhaps underneath where the sheep are standing. Doesn't really show, I need to dry it off first. So I'll dry that and then work into it a wee bit. So another thing that'll work really nicely, which I don't have in that example there, is this idea if the light is above, and the light is almost always above, might be coming at an angle. It's usually coming from above. If you create a shadow underneath the tree, that's quite a nice way of creating some space also. If you just create it's not too dark. This sort of darker area underneath the trees, that's better. That's quite nice. And then it's a bit more of this sort of dark foreground idea, just sort of random abstract shapes to suggest grasses, whatever. I'm interested in these negative shapes between the trunks of the trees in the sort of background here. So I'm going to have a go at them, highlighting them a wee bit, and they won't always all be dark negative spaces. Sometimes the tree might be darker, like that. There you go, try that off. Now I'm going to have a think about the sheep now. I'm going to give the sheep an edge, and someone so use a pen. You might use, if you have one, you might use a drawing nib, which I had here. Just some movable nib, and you get these handles that hold them. You might just use an ordinary writing pen, but the drawing nibs are generally better. You might use that. For speed, I'm going to use just a fine liner pen to give the sheep some of the bits of the sheep a bit of an edge. So once again, if the light's coming up down from above, you might not want to take that across the top, but you might. So maybe accentuate that idea of shadow underneath. And might also just, give some sense of grass. No, I don't want to keen on that. And then in the sheep themselves, I'll probably put a wee shadow as well, a bit of value, bit of the wash also to help give them some shape, but not just in the sort of underneath part, if you like. Not the top. Too much. That's too much. Take that away. Yeah. So they're all. It's actually, there's a big kind of. The first wash I did was much lighter around about them. Not sure if I like that or not, but I'll leave it there just now. So I might put some other kind of grassy ideas in using the smaller brush, that sort of thing. Work on these negative spaces in here a bit. Oops. Maybe some other branches. A bit of variety. Sort of idea, similar to the main trees. Wee holes in the branches idea. Other things going on. And that's sort of some of the sense of the entanglement we got with the in the background, the elements quite nice in there too. It's working okay, I think. I don't really have any washes on the main tree, so I might probably do that a wee bit to create a bit more variety. I'm not going to do it too much, sort of thing. Yeah, it's pretty good. And I could keep working into that. Probably not do too much more. So, trying to create a composition that works. There are lots of different ideas to think about in terms of what you're trying to do and how you want to do it. Concept, the idea that drives you is certainly an influence on that. But often composition will be about creating a balanced whole, if you like. Trying to put it simply. There you go. So I'll probably put a still of these images on the end of the video so you can You can refer to them if you need to. And I still don't like that. Turn that down a wee bit. There. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so dry brush as a technique, a way of working. I've used it in a very loose way. You can add more finer marks. You might want to use a drawing nib like that, and the ink, or a fine liner pen like that, to bring more detail, more linear marks, more that kind of interest. You can keep working into it. If you have white ink or a white chalk, you can work into that also. It's about making your ideas work. Is about playing with them to see what you can do with them. But when you start an idea, you might want to do some sort of sketch about thinking about the ideas, the main shapes and negative shapes, the main contrast, the lightness and darknesses, how those work together, and the kind of mark you're going to use. In this instance, I used quite a free use of the ink to make dry brush marks, but that's not the only way you necessarily need to approach it. You can approach it in many different ways. That was just the technique I chose to use for this as an example. And that's it, I think. So composition is the way we manipulate the formal properties of picture making. Line, dot, line, plane, shape, which is plain, volume, tone, color, texture, pattern. All of those things are the sort of formal properties of how we make a picture, and it's how we manipulate those ideas that shape our composition. Okay, so hope that's of use to you, and I'll put stills of this one and the earlier composition on the end of the video for you to look at. Okay, and that's it.